Have you ever heard a sermon that says put off anger or don't be angry, and you've had a confusing relationship with anger? I know that I have, and I actually spent most of my life afraid of my anger, and it ruined my relationship with myself, with others. I would stonewall them, I would be withdrawn, I would be a people pleaser. That comes oftentimes with a neglect of anger. And I was also harboring anger at God, and that kept me from hearing his voice. I became brave enough to really look at my anger and what it was communicating to me. Then I could actually heal and allow the Lord to do a deep work in my life. And so in this video, I'm just going to share with you some of the highlights of my very long 10, actually more than 10-year journey with anger. I think intentionally it's been 10 years when I finally got the permission from external people to be able to process the anger that I really had my whole life. And so my journey started back when I was very little and I didn't even have words and didn't even know what the feeling anger was. So in this video, I'm going to share with you my process, and this has sparked because of another video that I did, which I'll link up here, about a course on anger that I took pretty recently in my journey that really helped unearth and frame my anger and all the work that I had done on anger. So I'm going to share that resource with you. I'm not going to get into the theological implications of anger. I might give like little hints for that, but I'm just sharing with you my authentic experience and how God has worked in my life and what I've seen working with directees. I'm a spiritual director, and what I've seen as we've unpacked their anger and how it's actually moved them to more healing and to flourish with God, because that is what I believe God created us for, is to live an abundant life. And part of living a life of flourishing is by using the resource of anger in a holy way with God's Spirit versus on our own or trying to like manage our anger, which doesn't work. If you ever heard a sermon that's like, put away anger, and you're probably like, okay, how? What does that even mean? We don't often talk in the church about anger and the issues of power. We don't know what to do with this big vice of anger. Can anger be actually a virtue? We see Jesus being angry. We see God angry. We say, oh, yeah, that's righteous or unrighteous anger. And when we start to put it in these categories of moralization, we actually can truncate our process, which happened for me for a long time. I was afraid of my anger because I thought I was being bad or I wasn't a good Christian. And so I would stuff my anger trying to please God, and it actually made me avoid God because I had some deep issues in my heart that I couldn't tell him, because you don't tell your anger to God because that's not good. That's not appropriate. That has totally been reframed in my life. I found so much more freedom. There's this pressure to keep your anger locked down, to grin and bear it, to just be giving, altruistic, loving, kind. Where do we take our anger? Where do we feel our injustice? Where do we feel our boundaries? Oftentimes, to arrive at our boundaries, it's a lot of trial and error and messiness. And until I was given permission to be messy in a contained, wise way with other people who had dealt with their anger, I wasn't able to see freedom. I was just repressing it. I was using people pleasing as a defense mechanism and being like, oh, everything's fine. But really, then I would withdraw from relationships. When I was going through my deeper healing journey with spiritual formation and spiritual direction, I had a friendship that I started to get more and more brave and actually start to feel my anger towards how this person wasn't showing up for me, that I had these expectations. And I remember actually sharing some of that anger with her, and it collapsed the relationship. And I was really sad by that. I felt shame. I felt like it was so messy. And I remember talking to my therapist about it, and she said, well, that makes sense, because if you have been a people pleaser your whole life, you have been trained since childhood to be good, to make other people happy. And so when you finally are getting sick of that and you're bringing this new part of yourself, which is a real part of you, to this relationship, you became friendships with this silent agreement of, we're just going to be nice to each other, we're going to do these things, but now you're bringing a different piece of your heart. And what that did is it revealed that the relationship couldn't handle that. And you know what, to what degree was I doing it well? Was I kind? Was I maybe a little blaming in there? I don't really remember. But understanding that when sometimes we come into relationships kind of like 12 steps. Some people meet in like 12-step programs and they connect over their alcoholism. But when they both get sober and they both get healthy, they start to realize, oh, wow, what bonded us was our trauma. What bonded us was maybe this dysfunctional dynamic. Well, now that I'm changing this dance and bringing more of my anger into the relationship has to change. And oftentimes that means withdrawal or an implosion, unfortunately. I wish that friend well. It seems we're in totally different places in our lives right now, but that's just an example of when anger gets really messy, it can feel uncivilized. It can feel terrifying, especially with however it's been laid down in our psyche or our souls growing up. I'm going to share with you a little bit about my background. So when I was growing up, I saw a lot of anger displayed as rage. It was really cutting and vindictive and manipulative. I saw it as game playing. It was very painful to watch. To have anger, especially from those who were older, caregiving to me, a lot of their anger got downloaded onto my body, and it left me with a lot of shame and hatred of anger. And anytime I would smell anger or feel like someone was angry at me, I would immediately go into fight or flight. And so that created this people pleasing where if I realized if I was fawning after, if I was caring for people, if I was really quiet, or if I didn't disturb anybody, that I wouldn't elicit this anger, this rage, which really was misplaced. It wasn't something that I deserved. It's just something that happened in my environment growing up. And so not only did I see other people's anger as destructive, where it felt like it shattered my heart and it created this sense of anxiety in me, I also would show up with my anger at times and get punished for it. Oh, you have an attitude, or you need to be this way, or I've done so much for you. There was often dismissal of my anger. There wasn't really entering into my anger, especially if it triggered the other person and it was about them. There were times when I'm sure that my anger was validated because of someone else, but when it was directly in a relationship, it was oftentimes criticized because that person that was frustrated with my anger took it really personally, and they couldn't help me develop anger. And obviously also growing up in the church, we don't see a lot of anger healthily displayed. We hear verses more like put off anger. And when I was a child, I just took it as, okay, just do it. Just put it off. But there's a whole process to do that, and I didn't learn how to do that. So through this healing journey that I was on, through therapy, spiritual direction, spiritual formation, which actually, this was my biggest one. This is the pool noodle. When I was on a 3-week intensive retreat where I was in isolation and I had a therapist who's also a spiritual director, helped me process a lot of the emotions from my childhood. And the whole program was about growing in our union with Christ, but it was dealing with the things that kept us stuck. One of the things that he gave me was a pool noodle, and he gave me this instruction to go into this cabin, and he said, this person you have all this anger at, you're never going to actually hurt them, but you're going to get all this anger out. And I remember being psychologically frozen. I remember he was like, try it here. We're in his office. I remember being like, I'm mad at you. Like, it terrified me. And he's okay, you can't really do it here, maybe because I'm here. We'll go back to this cabin and, try it out. And so I had the person in my mind that I was really angry at. I remember looking at this figure of this person. After an hour, my body was trying to keep me safe. I didn't think anger was safe. So I finally was like, okay, and I yelled. And I remember after I did this thing and I yelled and I took this noodle and I was like, bam, I immediately dropped it and I panicked and started crying. It was these young feelings of, oh my God, I'm going to be in trouble now. And it was this whole visceral experience. And so that really started to get me to see, oh, wow, I have a deep dysfunctional relationship with anger. That there were some things in my childhood that were actually not okay. And I didn't have the voice to have boundaries and to say, no, thank you. I don't want that. I was able to find that voice on that retreat. I don't think you need to go on a 3-week isolated retreat. That was a unique experience. But I actually, then when I came home, I always think it was a pink pool noodle. I bought my own because when there are moments where I get angry, I need to get out of my body. This is a symbol and a tool to help me remember that I don't want to keep this anger stored up in me. I want to let it go. So the first thing was dealing with my fears around anger. It wasn't even the anger itself. I had to deal with the whole entire defense system that I kept in place to deal with my anger. Now, some people have more explosive anger. My anger meant more inward. I was more angry with myself, highly critical, workaholic, never hard to rest, so hard to rest for me. I was a people pleaser. I was burnt out really easily. I had a hard time having fun and playing because I didn't feel safe inside my body, because I had compartmentalized my anger and it was just stuck in my body because I didn't know what else to do with it. I felt a lot of shame around it. Whenever I'd get angry, I would collapse into sadness because that seemed more appropriate. When I realized that I was actually losing my power, and it wasn't because I realized it, it's because someone else who was wise around me reflected that back to me, who wasn't afraid of anger and actually saw it as a human emotion that God gave to us to protect us. When I was able to see that my anger wasn't so bad and threatening, that I was seeing a shadow. Have you ever seen Wizard of Oz? How there's like the big head and he's the projection, but really behind the curtain is this man who's in this megaphone. That's how anger felt. My anger felt like I was this big lion. And I had a spiritual director. Yeah, I think your anger is more like a kitten. Like you think you're this big scary person, but you're really not. You have this warped sense of your identity around anger. To admit that some of my anger was really a defense to keep me from feeling hurt, was realizing there was vulnerability under there, that I was hurt in certain areas and I was mad and I did do vindictive things, and I had to own that my anger would leak out. That's the thing. If we think, oh, if I detach from my anger, that somehow it goes away. Psychologists tell us that a lot of the data is when anger is in your body, it triggers cortisol. I'm not like going to go too much into the science. It's just my experience. Maybe I'll do another video later where I talk about more of kind of like what is anger. That theoretical and understanding of it has actually helped me neutralize it and stop moralizing it so that I can actually grow in the Holy Spirit and virtue with it. But when there's just cortisol running through my body, it was maybe a perception of a threat, of something that was maybe a loss, feeling hurt. I was able to get connected to the vulnerability underneath that. Anger stopped losing its charge and its power. One of the big things that helped me was my spiritual director, who noticed I had a lot of anger, especially because of how critical I was towards myself and was not able to really live in freedom with myself. That was a residual effect of anger. And so she actually encouraged me to write psalms about my anger, a ton of psalms that actually were imprecatory psalms, which are venting towards God. So this is very biblical in the sense of God can hear our wrath. He can hear our anger and our rage. And if we do not get it out, we will rage on other people in our life. Some people, maybe you get angry at your kids, and maybe you get angry at your parents. I know that whenever I really get angry at my husband, I have to pause, and if I really do the inner work, my anger, most of the time, if I'm honest, it's really because I have accumulated hurt from a past experience that has been embedded in me. Have you ever had something very minor set you off and make you really angry? That's because that there's a backlog of emotions that have been stored up. The neuroscience has found that human body has the amazing ability to block those feelings so that you can continue to function, because oftentimes it's not appropriate to vent your anger like around your kids, or say you're in war and something happens, you have to keep going. Our bodies are amazing that they can compartmentalize, but when it stays compartmentalized and it's not healed, it can wreak havoc on our lives. I know it did for mine. And so when something small set me off, I would just shame myself. Well, that's stupid. But no, there's actually a deep pool of anger that I hadn't dealt with. And so when I realized that whenever something was really supercharged, that was actually an invitation for me to process with God. And so the Psalms were one of the helpful ways for me to do that, to see, well, David was really angry. He let God have it. There are some really dark things. These are prayers that David and Jesus, I believe all Psalms are Jesus' Psalms, so that they're things that he would pray. Jesus on the cross said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Sounds like a sad, a devastating, and an angry cry. And so we think, oh, we can never be angry at God. Jesus was experiencing wrath. When he threw the tables over in the temple, Jesus was so dynamic and messy. He was a full human. And so part of me owning my humanity was owning my anger as well. One of the things I actually intentionally did was a course on anger. It's called The Art of Anger. And this is just one piece of my journey. I wish I could say it's healed my anger and I'm perfect now. No, it's an ongoing conversation. It's an ongoing growth where I'm moving the needle and God's continuing to grow me. But this course on anger, which was, I'll link below, great resource. I actually got to name my anger and actually uncovered some anger that I hadn't processed in therapy or spiritual direction or on this 3-week retreat. And I processed an anger towards a friendship that I had withdrawn from and I couldn't quite figure out why. It's one of those things you can easily go, whatever. Yeah, I'm not really interested. I'm like, oh, I had some anger harbored. So the first thing I had to do was give myself permission to name my anger and to say it's there, whether it's righteous or not. Taking out the moralization was really the most healing thing because I really struggle with being good, doing the right thing, making sure I'm pleasing to God. And all of that is my flesh, essentially. It's my way of controlling. If I'm good enough, then God will. And that's not true. God already loves me. And then therefore he can now rebuild me from the inside out through his spirit, through power of what he's doing in my life. When I took the moralization about worrying about righteous or unrighteous and in a safe place is able to vent and tell the truth of how I felt, whether that was a crazy expectation or not, I finally was able to then get at the truth of it. And we looked at our anger, what was truly there. You have to be honest about what's really going on so that you can let go of and embrace a new way of relating, which might be to move in power. It might be to confront somebody and say to put boundaries on, but to be able to admit, I am mad here. So much of the time I would just say, no, I'm not mad. I'm fine. But I'm like, no, that really stung. That really stunk. What just happened? Being able to name it helped me then move to greater freedom because then I could find power. Anger can do two things. It can protect a village and protect a soul, or it can destroy a soul and destroy a village. And anger left untethered in this one end of the spectrum can be totally devastating and vindictive and evil. There are scriptures like revenge is of the Lord, but at the same time, anger also moves in power to promote justice, to protect people, to find our no, to discover what our calling is, to say, no, that's not me, or I'm mad that there's this dysfunctional thing happening in the church. But when our anger goes unchecked, it creates all types of problems. And you've probably seen that in your life. I'm sure you've seen it when you watch the political debate. I know some of you don't watch me from America. You just see anger seething, unprocessed. I have never seen a politician that has done soul work, that has really done deep inner soul work. There isn't this deep owning of this is my anger and really what's going on. Can I let this go and actually move in peace? When I realized that I could move to a place of power, love, and truth, that was the end goal of my anger, that it was actually to move in love and grace, but also to the truth, because anger tells the truth of what's really happened. And anger tells the truth even of what I'm perceiving to be happening, which may or may not be true. There's plenty of times when I have perceived a threat or perceived a hurt that actually wasn't. Once I got out of the charge and let the emotions and the energy of anger and the cortisol go, I was able to then see, okay, now what am I going to do about this situation? And it wasn't until I had that permission to see what was in my anger to actually move through it in a safe way. Then find out, who do I want to be? We oftentimes jump to that transcendent. I want to be righteous and have meekness, which is the fruit of the spirit. Meekness is power under control, I believe. So when we want to rush to meekness, it can oftentimes rush to being a doormat. We think, oh, I'm just going to not be angry. Being angry is a gift that God gave to you. Now, is it not connected to your faith sometimes? Absolutely. And we all have different spectrums of that. If your patterns with anger did not arrive in a day, they're not going to leave in a day. That's why I say it's taken me like 9 to 10 years to really unpack and come to a more healthy way of relating to my anger. It's an art. It is part of being human that I believe God speaks a lot to and deeply cares about how we feel, but our feelings are not us. My anger is not who I am. My anger is a response to how I'm perceiving the world, and that perception can change. And that's the hope that I want to offer you. And if you are feeling stuck in your anger, if you're feeling afraid of your anger, or you feel like you don't have access to it, some people don't have access to their anger and they need it. You need your anger. If you don't, you're going to continue to enable evil to continue to happen. We live in an evil age, to use Jesus' words. So of course there's going to be things that are going to make you mad. And it's just, what do we do with them? And we oftentimes rush to the doing before you go to the observing. And that's what I really learned. I need to observe and to get quiet and to not act. When I get angry, my first thing is not to do. My first thing is to pause, to reflect, to find a safe person if I feel untethered, a spiritual director, a group, someone I can say, I'm really angry at this. Everything in your life is redeemable. Jesus is not trying to destroy your life and rebuild a new one. He's in the business of redeeming all of our lives. There's something wrong with you because you're angry. You might just need some training. You might need some real, tangible, deep healing that needs to happen with your anger. So I encourage you to consider checking out that course below. A friend that does it, she does spiritual direction. She's great. She's a great resource for it. I would be happy to walk with you through some of your relationship with anger, especially anger towards God. The last thing that I'll say is what really helped me deal with my anger is learning how to rest. I wasn't resting because I had this incessant aggression towards myself to keep working or to keep pleasing or to keep trying versus saying, you know what, it's enough. I don't need to do it all. Dealing with your anger is a very exhausting emotional process that I don't think we give ourselves enough space to actually feel. When I would get angry at something at work or something in a relationship, it would zap the life out of me. And I would often try to rush to the result, rush to the acceptance. And when I stopped rushing the process, kept myself safe, mind you, I didn't want to do collateral damage. I didn't want to hurt anybody. At the same time, I'm not going to minimize or neglect it anymore because that is just as much violence to my soul, and it keeps me from deeper connection to God, myself, and others, which is what I believe we were created for. And that's how we really flourish, is to be connected and be alive in our bodies and actually pay attention to our bodies. There's so much more I could say about anger and navigating my body. There's like 10 practices that I actually learned that I didn't have time to share in this video because it's getting very long. So let me know down below if you want me to address other questions about anger. What was your experience with anger? Feel free to share down below, and any resources that I mentioned in this video will be linked. I pray this blesses you. Take what you need and leave the rest here, and I will see you in the next video.